You're going to kill someone! I shouted it across the construction site, loud enough that 3 workers stopped mid-hammer. The woman standing at the edge of the freshly poured concrete turned slowly, clipboard in hand, that practiced smile already forming. Excuse me, Mr. Harrison. This ridge is unstable. You're pouring foundation on loose soil. When it rains, and it will rain, that entire hillside is going to slide. You're building a death trap. Margaret Keene, HOA president of Riverside Heights, tilted her head like I'd just told her the earth was flat. Behind her, the skeletal frame of what they called the Community Vista Pavilion jutted from the bluff like broken ribs. We've had professionals assess this site, Mr. Harrison. Real engineers, not just hobbyists with opinions. I am a real engineer, licensed geologist. 20 years, and I'm telling you, this slope can't support what you're building. She glanced at the workers, then back at me, her voice dropping to that dangerous suburban sweetness. Well, fortunately, you don't get a vote. You're not part of this community. You made that very clear when you refused to sell us your land. I refused to sell you my land because you wanted to build this monstrosity 30 feet from my living room window, and now you'll just have to watch us improve around you. She turned back to the foreman. Keep working. Ignore him. As I walked back toward my house, hands shaking with frustration, I heard one of the workers mutter, "Dude's probably right, though." His buddy laughed. Not our problem. But it was about to be everyone's problem. My name is Marcus Harrison. I'm 43 years old. I've spent 2 decades studying how mountains move and why slopes fail, and I live on the only piece of land in a 5-mile radius that doesn't answer to the Riverside Heights HOA. I bought this property 4 years ago for 3 reasons: solitude, science, and the view. Nothing else. No block parties, no lawn committee meetings, no mandatory holiday decoration schedule. Just raw Colorado wilderness, and the kind of quiet where you can actually hear yourself think. My house sits on Sentinel Ridge, perched above a planned community that sprawls down the valley like a spreadsheet turned into architecture. Every house identical, every lawn exactly 2.3 inches tall, every mailbox the same shade of bronze, every driveway pressure washed to the same sterile gray. From my deck, I could see the whole subdivision laid out below like a board game designed by someone who hated fun. Rows of beige boxes with identical 2-car garages, identical landscaping, identical everything. Mine looks like it came from a different planet, timber and stone, built to work with the land instead of against it. I designed it myself, using principles I'd learned studying mountain architecture in the Rockies. The foundation was anchored into bedrock, not just poured on top of soil. The walls were oriented to minimize wind load. Every beam calculated for snow weight and seismic stress. It wasn't just a house. It was an engineering solution to the question, how do you live on a ridge without fighting the ridge? And I intended to keep it that way. For 3 years, the HOA left me mostly alone. I'd get occasional letters, polite at first, then increasingly insistent suggesting I join the community. Each time, I'd respond with the same answer, a polite decline accompanied by legal documentation proving my parcel was purchased, clean and clear. Fully exempt from any covenant restrictions, my property had been carved out of the original land grant decades before Riverside Heights even existed. The deed was crystal clear, no HOA, no covenants. No restrictions. I was an island of independence in a sea of suburban conformity. For a while, that was enough. Margaret would send her little letters. I'd file them away. Life went on. Then everything changed when they asked to buy a wedge of my property. It started with a knock on my door one Saturday morning. Margaret stood there with Tyler, both wearing matching polo shirts with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, like they were running for local office. "Marcus?" Margaret began, that rehearsed smile already in place. "We'd like to discuss an exciting opportunity that could benefit both you and the community." I should have closed the door right then. Instead, I invited them in for coffee, a decision I'd regret for months. They sat at my kitchen table and laid out their proposal. The HOA wanted to purchase a narrow strip of land along my southern boundary, maybe 60 feet wide, running the full length of my property. It's strategic, Margaret explained, unrolling a map that looked like it had been drawn by a child with crayons. This parcel would allow us to expand our recreational amenities and create a truly spectacular community space. What kind of space? Tyler jumped in, clearly excited. A multi-tiered public pavilion, terraces for gatherings, maybe an amphitheater component. Scenic viewpoints where residents can appreciate the valley. I looked at the map more closely. The narrow strip they wanted would put their construction directly beneath my south-facing windows, the ones that currently looked out at unobstructed wilderness. So you'd be building what, exactly? A deck? A platform? A cultural center? Margaret corrected. Somewhere the community can gather, appreciate nature, host events, wine tastings, concerts, educational programs. How big? Well, the engineering specs are still being finalized, but we're looking at approximately 8,000 square feet of terrace space, plus supporting infrastructure. 8,000 square feet. That wasn't a pavilion. That was a damn shopping mall hanging off the side of my mountain. And my view? Margaret waved dismissively. You'd still have views to the east and west. The structure would only impact the southern exposure. The southern exposure? The entire reason I'd bought this property. The view that made every sunrise worth waking up for. I set down my coffee cup. Thank you for the offer, but I'm not interested in selling. Margaret's smile tightened. We're prepared to be very generous. Well above market value for that strip. It's not about money. Everything's about money, Marcus. Not this. Tyler tried a different angle. Think about the community benefit. You'd be contributing to something larger than yourself. Something that brings people together. I moved up here specifically to get away from people being brought together. Margaret stood up, smoothing her blazer with sharp, precise movements. We were hoping you'd be reasonable about this. I am being reasonable. The answer is no. We'll be in touch, she said, already moving toward the door. After they left, I stood at my window and looked down at the slope they wanted to build on. Even from here, I could see the warning signs. The way water ran during storms, the old erosion scars barely hidden by new vegetation, the subtle convexity that screamed unstable soil to anyone trained to see it. They weren't just asking to block my view. They were asking to build a disaster. Not the whole thing, just a narrow strip along the southern edge, maybe 60 feet wide. According to Margaret, that slice was strategic. If they owned it, they could expand their recreational amenities with a multi-tiered public pavilion for scenic enjoyment and community gathering. On paper, it sounded almost reasonable. In reality, it would have been a concrete monstrosity sitting directly beneath my south-facing windows, blocking my view of the valley. Picnic tables, screaming toddlers, and HOA wine tasting events where Margaret could hold court like a suburban dictator. I said no. Politely at first, then firmly, then through my attorney with a formal notice of refusal citing property rights and zoning protections. So they pivoted. I came home one afternoon to find survey markers dotting the landscape near my property line. Bright orange flags dancing in the wind like middle fingers. No phone call, no courtesy knock. Just an HOA newsletter illegally stuffed in my mailbox announcing the Riverside Vista Center, a public terrace project designed to harmonize with nature while elevating community standards. I nearly choked on my set, coffee. I went straight to their office, a double-wide trailer that looked as temporary as their planning skills, and asked to speak with Margaret. She emerged wearing a salmon-colored blazer with gold buttons, oversized sunglasses, and that Botox smooth smile I'd seen in 100 HOA horror stories online. Marcus, she said, like we were old friends. So wonderful to see you taking an interest in community development. I dropped a folder on her desk. Inside, a detailed geological survey of the ridge, annotated in color-coded sections. I'd done the work myself over 2 weekends, though any first-year geology student could have told you the same thing. The soil on that slope was loose, poorly bonded, and absolutely unsuitable for heavy construction without serious reinforcement. Margaret, this ridge is unstable. The erosion patterns alone should terrify you. You try to pour concrete here without proper slope stabilization, and that whole hillside could collapse. We're talking millions in damage. Potentially, lives at risk. She flipped through the report with all the comprehension of a toddler looking at a tax return. Marcus, with all due respect, we've had our own assessments done by certified professionals. Can I see them? They're internal documents. That's not how safety works. She closed the folder and slid it back across the desk. Thank you for your concern. It's been noted. I followed up in writing. Sent certified letters with everything, topographic maps, risk analyses, even historical photographs of previous minor slides that had occurred decades before any development was planned. No response. 2 weeks later, I was woken up at 6 a.m. by jackhammers. They were pouring foundation. From my deck, I watched the circus unfold. Cranes, cement mixers, workers hauling steel beams to the edge of a slope. I knew damn well couldn't hold them without massive retaining infrastructure. It was like watching toddlers build a Jenga tower on a trampoline. The construction site transformed into a full-scale ego project almost overnight. What started as a simple community pavilion became the Riverside Cultural Center, complete with terraces, an underground parking structure, and rumors of a wine-tasting deck. Nothing screams community like drinking Chardonnay next to a geological disaster zone. They installed temporary fencing that sliced right through my view. Their trucks started parking on my gravel turnaround. Once, they left open bags of cement against my wooden fence, not out of malice, just entitled carelessness. When I tried to speak with the site foreman, he shrugged and handed me a business card. Keene Development LLC. Margaret's nephew was the project manager. Of course. I filed an official complaint with the county engineering department, sent them my analysis, my credentials, my concerns. A week later, I got a generic response thanking me for my civic awareness and assuring me the matter had been received. Bureaucracy at its most useless, so I went deeper. Called colleagues from my Denver consulting days, real slope stability engineers who didn't treat contour lines like abstract art. Every single one came back with the same reaction. What the hell are they doing? Meanwhile, the HOA got personal. One morning, I found flyers stuffed in my mailbox. Progress at Riverside Heights, for the many, not the few. One flyer featured a rendering of the finished pavilion. I recognized the view in the background. It was taken from my property. They'd literally photoshopped out my house. Trucks blocked my driveway, delivery pallets sat across the shared access road, workers left trash on my fence line. I documented everything. Photographs, timestamps, GPS coordinates. I'm a scientist. Evidence is what I do. Then came the community meeting. They didn't hold it in the usual clubhouse, but under a white tent at the construction site, folding chairs arranged like they were launching a tech startup. Margaret opened like a politician. We are building a legacy. This project will elevate Riverside Heights for generations to come. During Q&A, I stood up. Has the HOA filed an environmental impact report? Margaret didn't even look at me. She handed the mic to her nephew, Tyler, who mumbled something about private compliance verification protocols and pointed to a slideshow that looked rendered on a PlayStation 2. I dropped a printed copy of Colorado Revised Slope Development Statutes on their podium. Section 12, Paragraph 4. All developments within 500 feet of documented erosion zones require an EIR approved by a certified agency. Do you have one? Margaret's smile never wavered. Thank you, Marcus. Your input has been noted. They moved on to discussing what color the terrace umbrellas would be. That night, I sent another packet certified to the County Planning Commission with a copy to the Regional Geological Board. Then, I started digging through permit records. That's when I noticed something interesting. The approval signature on the HOA's development permit belonged to Councilman Richard Hayes. I'd seen him at Margaret's 4th of July party last summer, sipping sangria like he owned the canyon. I hadn't thought much of it then, but suddenly the pieces clicked together like tectonic plates before a quake. Hayes had been fast-tracking HOA permits for over a year. Not one had been flagged for environmental review. I filed a Freedom of Information request for any correspondence between Riverside Heights HOA and Richard Hayes over the past 18 months. It would take time, but I had time. Margaret was still pouring concrete like she had a deadline from God. The next morning, I stood on my deck and watched workers install steel beams right at the break line of the slope. One of them looked up at me and waved. I didn't wave back. I was too busy calculating the cost of their mistake and wondering who was going to pay for it. It started with the rain. Not the gentle kind that taps politely on windows. This was Colorado's spring vengeance, sheets of cold, relentless water slamming into the ridge like it owed nature a debt. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, my rain gauge had measured 6 inches. By Thursday, 9. By Friday, we'd exceeded the monthly average, and the Weather Service was predicting another system moving in over the weekend. I was monitoring the slope obsessively. 3 weeks earlier, I'd done something Margaret would have called paranoid if she'd known about it. I'd installed soil moisture sensors along the ridge, professional-grade equipment, the kind we used in landslide prediction research. 6 sensors buried at different depths, all feeding data wirelessly to my laptop. I watched those numbers like a cardiac surgeon watching a patient's vitals during surgery. Monday, 22% saturation. Normal, Tuesday, 31%. Elevated, but manageable. Wednesday, 48%. Concerning, Thursday, 67%. Dangerous. Friday, 81%. Critical. By Saturday morning, we hit 89% saturation levels. I'd only seen once before, during a research project in Washington State, right before a slope let go and took out half a logging road. I called the County Emergency Management Office. I'm reporting an imminent landslide risk at Riverside Heights development. The dispatcher sounded bored. Sir, are you seeing active movement? Not yet, but the soil moisture levels? So there's no current emergency? There will be if this rain continues. We'll make a note of your concern. Thank you for calling. Click. I tried the HOA emergency line. Voicemail. I sent emails to Margaret, Tyler, the board, the county engineer, the city council. Subject line. Urgent. Slope failure imminent. No responses. I stood on my deck that night, watching rain hammer the construction site below. Water was pooling on the terraces, running down the slope in streams that carved tiny channels through the disturbed soil. Every civil engineer learns the same lesson in their first soil mechanics class. Water is the enemy of stability. Add water to soil, and you change everything. The particles lose cohesion, friction decreases, weight increases, what was solid becomes liquid. And they'd poured thousands of tons of concrete onto soil that was now holding more water than it had in 2 decades. I didn't sleep that night. At 5:47 a.m. Sunday, my laptop alarm went off. Sensor 5, the one buried deepest, closest to the construction site, had just spiked to 94% saturation. I was pulling on my boots when I felt it. A vibration. Subtle. Like someone dropping a heavy object in a distant room. Then another. Then a sound low, grinding, primal. I ran to the window. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The slope looked wrong, like someone had tilted a photograph. Then, I saw movement, not fast. Not like the movies. Slow, inevitable, unstoppable. The earth was flowing. 60 meters of ridge face, saturated beyond capacity, simply gave up fighting gravity. The soil didn't crack or shatter, it moved as one coherent mass, like a slow-motion avalanche made of mud and rock and broken dreams. I watched the first terrace, the one they'd poured just 3 weeks ago, tilt forward. For a moment it seemed to hang suspended, defying physics. Then the support pylons snapped. The sound was like rifle shots, echoing across the valley. steel beams bent like pipe cleaners, concrete fractured into jagged slabs. The entire structure, easily 400 tons of material, slid forward and down, riding the wave of moving earth. The second terrace followed. Then the underground parking structure's exposed edge collapsed inward, rebar twisting like spaghetti, concrete crumbling like stale bread. The dust cloud that rose up was biblical, a gray-brown pillar that climbed 50 feet into the air and just hung there, suspended in the rain. Then silence. Absolute, eerie silence. I stood frozen, hands pressed against the window, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Months of warnings ignored, millions of dollars of construction destroyed, and, worst of all, 3 houses at the base of the slide that had just taken direct hits. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. There's been a landslide at Riverside Heights, Sentinel Ridge, multiple structures damaged, possible casualties. Sir, how many people? I don't know. Just send everyone. Now. I hung up and started documenting. Photos from every angle. Video of the dust still settling. Screenshots of my moisture sensor data showing the exact moment the slope let go. Then I ran outside. From my deck, the destruction was somehow worse. What had been a construction site now looked like a war zone. Twisted metal jutted from mounds of mud. Broken concrete slabs lay scattered like discarded toys, and down at the bottom, 3 houses sat damaged and vulnerable. The closest house, a split level with kids' bikes in the yard, had lost its entire back deck. The structure was just gone. Ripped away cleanly, leaving exposed rooms open to the elements like a dollhouse with the back wall removed. The second house, a 2-story colonial, showed a massive crack running up the exterior wall from foundation to roof. I could see daylight through it. The third house, smallest of the 3, had been hit by a chunk of the terrace. A slab of concrete the size of a pickup truck sat embedded in what used to be their garage. Within 10 minutes, sirens filled the valley. Fire trucks, police cars, ambulances. They came from every direction, lights flashing, creating a surreal disco effect in the dawn light. Residents poured out of their homes in robes and slippers, gathering in clusters at the edge of the taped-off zone. I could hear fragments of conversation drifting up the ridge, heard it from inside like an earthquake. "Where's Margaret?" That geologist warned them. One of the first responders, a fire captain with 30 years etched into his face, made his way up to my property. "You're Marcus Harrison?" "Yes." "You're the one who called this in?" "And predicted it. 3 months ago. I have documentation." He looked at the disaster zone, then back at me. "We're going to need to see that documentation. All of it." "I have it ready." He nodded slowly. "Anyone hurt?" "I don't think so. Most people were still asleep when it let go. Lucky. Lucky would have been them listening to me in the first place." He almost smiled. "Yeah. Stay available. The investigators are going to want to talk to you." By noon, the site was crawling with officials, structural engineers, geotechnical specialists, insurance adjusters, county inspectors, someone from FEMA, even a few state geologists I recognized from conferences. I gave my statement 4 separate times to 4 different agencies. By late afternoon, the preliminary damage assessment came in. 3 homes with major structural damage requiring evacuation, 7 additional homes with minor damage, the entire Riverside Vista Center total loss. Estimated repair costs, $15.2 million. Estimated timeline for site stabilization, 18 months minimum, and then the hammer really dropped. At 4:37 p.m., a statement appeared on the insurance company's website. After thorough review of documentation provided by Mr. Marcus Harrison, independent geological consultant, Riverside Mutual Insurance has determined that the Riverside Heights HOA was provided with explicit warnings regarding slope instability prior to construction. Under the terms of the policy's known risk exclusion clause, coverage is denied for damages resulting from willful negligence. No claims will be paid. Translation: the HOA was on its own. $15 million with no insurance to cover it. The news vans arrived within an hour. I declined interviews at first, but one reporter, a woman named Lisa Park from Channel 4, caught me as I was checking my mailbox. "Mr. Harrison, is it true you warned the HOA this would happen?" "Yes. Can you prove it?" I handed her a USB drive I'd prepared that morning. "Everything's on here. Certified letters, engineering reports, email chains, sensor data, timestamps. Take it." She looked at the drive like I'd handed her the Holy Grail. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because the truth should be public, and because maybe next time someone will listen when a geologist says, 'Don't build there.'" The story ran that night. Geologists warned HOA months ago that ridge will collapse. They showed footage of the destruction, then cut to excerpts from my reports with timestamps clearly visible. They interviewed the fire captain who confirmed I'd predicted this. They even found the 911 recording of my call months earlier trying to stop construction. By morning, it had gone viral. By evening, Margaret still hadn't made a public appearance. But Tyler had. He was there at the site, pale and sweating, trying to direct operations he had no authority to direct. I watched from my deck as a fire official finally lost patience. "Son, you need to step back behind the tape or I'm having you removed in handcuffs." Tyler stepped back. And the whole time, my sensors kept recording data, documenting the ongoing instability, proving with every data point that this wasn't an act of God, it was an act of human arrogance. And I had the receipts. The letter arrived 2 weeks after the slide. Certified mail, HOA letterhead, corporate spin wrapped in legal threats. The gist: they were accusing me of causing the landslide. According to their preliminary investigation, the catastrophic soil shift had originated from my property due to an unauthorized water drainage system that allegedly redirected runoff toward their construction site. I laughed out loud in my kitchen. Then I read it again and stopped laughing. This wasn't just retaliation. This was an attempt to flip the entire narrative. They weren't bluffing either. Within the week, I received notice of a civil complaint filed with county court requesting a temporary injunction and access to survey my land. They wanted to investigate the extent of artificial modifications to natural water flow. Margaret's name wasn't on the documents. Tyler's was, along with a Denver law firm that specialized in HOA litigation. Simultaneously, anonymous posts appeared on the neighborhood forum. Did Marcus's slope work cause this? Anyone else notice those trenches on his land? One claimed I had a secret network of underground drains. Another said I'd bragged about controlling runoff at a community barbecue. I've never been to a damn barbecue, but I didn't panic. I documented everything. Screenshots, timestamps, metadata. Then I called my lawyer, and I brought in backup. I hired a private geotechnical firm from Boulder Independent, known for being thorough to the point of religious devotion. They dispatched a team with sensors, drones, LiDAR equipment. In parallel, I reached out to the county's senior environmental inspector, a serious man named David Sullivan who wore his badge like it actually meant something. Reyes walked my land personally. We went over elevation gradients, historical water flow, sediment patterns. At one point he squatted down, ran his finger through the soil, and grunted. "This ground hasn't been touched in years. Drainage? Bullshit." I also compiled every piece of correspondence I'd sent over 9 months. Hard copies, signed receipts, digital timestamps. My folder was thicker than their entire bylaws binder. Still, the HOA pushed forward. Their lawyers requested an emergency court order for entry to conduct preliminary slope analysis. My attorney filed a motion to dismiss and countersued for harassment and defamation. Then Tyler started appearing near my fence line, pretending to check structural proximity, whispering into a headset like he was auditioning for a B-grade spy movie. "Tyler," I called from my porch, coffee in hand. "You're on camera. And also stupid." He left. The media reached out. Apparently the HOA had issued a statement implying that certain private landowners may have contributed to the destabilization. I invited the reporter over. Showed him the ridge, the sensors, the erosion patterns, the massive slab of concrete now resting in a sad heap at the bottom of the hill. Handed him the engineering reports, the insurance letters, the HOA's own promotional materials. He didn't ask more questions after that. But I wasn't done. I requested public copies of the HOA's construction permits and soil test records. What I found made me whistle. The construction license had been signed by a private architect who lacked Mountain Zone accreditation. The environmental waiver was hand-filled, missing key agency stamps. One page looked scanned crooked with signatures that didn't match the state database. They'd built an empire on sand and bad paperwork, and now they were trying to drag me under the rubble with them. But I had something they didn't: truth, science, and receipts. The independent report from Boulder came back clean. No artificial drainage, no redirected runoff, no signs of tampering. Their findings were so detailed, I wanted to frame them. The final paragraph said it all. Destabilization caused by excessive structural load placed on unconsolidated and unreinforced slope. Translation: they built like idiots, and gravity handled the rest. The environmental inspector's report followed a week later. Reyes wasn't a man of many words. No evidence of external influence. HOA proceeded despite credible warnings. Documented negligence contributed to geotechnical failure. Boom. With both reports, my attorney filed for full dismissal of the injunction and counterclaimed for damages. The court set a hearing date. Then something interesting arrived in my mailbox. An anonymous manila envelope, no return address. Inside, printed emails. Internal correspondence between Margaret, Tyler, and Councilman Hayes. I read every word. One thread from 6 months before the collapse showed Margaret asking Hayes if they could expedite zoning review. Hayes replied he'd push it through under small structure exemption. Another email from, "Keep the environmental stuff quiet. Thanks for signing off personally." The kicker was from Margaret herself. Marcus's obsession with geology will bury him in graphs, but we've got the votes. "Oh, Margaret!" I handed the entire envelope to my attorney. He almost smiled. Meanwhile, the HOA started cracking. Moderate board members began distancing themselves publicly. Forum tone shifted from Marcus's fault to, "Why didn't we vote on this?" A quiet revolt brewing. I contacted a producer at Channel 7 News and handed her everything. Reports, leaked emails, drone footage, clips of Tyler sneaking around my property, whispering into his headset. She pitched it to her editor. They wanted a follow-up. Live. The station invited Margaret for a community discussion on development and lessons learned. She agreed. Probably thought it was her chance to spin the story. I wasn't invited on camera. That was fine. I preferred staying behind the scenes. The day of the broadcast, I watched from my living room as Margaret sat under studio lights, hair sprayed stiff, voice syrupy with concern. She talked about acts of God, about unexpected instability, about how the HOA deeply regretted the impact. Then the anchor asked about permitting. Margaret hesitated. The anchor pulled out one of the leaked emails. Margaret's composure cracked. They showed the drone footage, real-time feed of the slope, still sagging beneath what remained of the lower terrace. The anchor noted erosion happening directly under structures that had never been stabilized. Margaret, sweating now, snapped, "What do you want from me? Richard approved it all." "I didn't sneak anything through. He said the waiver didn't need full process if we classified it as community beautification." Silence. She'd just thrown a sitting councilman under the bus. On live TV, with cameras rolling. Next morning, the video had 300,000 views. Headlines screamed, "HOA president blames councilman on live TV. Margaret cracks under pressure, admits permit shortcuts. I didn't have to fight anymore." They were collapsing from the inside. Within 48 hours, Hayes' office went silent. No statements. Phones to voicemail. That same morning, I was subpoenaed not as a defendant, but as a witness. The county had opened a formal investigation into Riverside Heights development practices. The DA's office requested all my documentation. I gave them everything, including a binder labeled "Ho Lies and Stupidity" indexed. By Friday, Hayes was served. Turns out Margaret's favor had helped push through 5 separate projects over 3 years, all with similar shortcuts, all rubber-stamped by his office. HOA board members started resigning, one by one. Health reasons, personal conflicts. Margaret was reportedly begging people to stay, offering to cover legal fees. They didn't. Insurance agents returned to finish their assessment. Not only were they withholding payments, they were seeking recovery from the HOA. Subrogation. You ignored warnings. You broke the slope. Now we're billing you for cleanup. $3.1 million and counting. That's when the reserves froze. HOA members logged in to pay dues and saw red banners. Legal hold. Disbursements. Suspended pending investigation. Margaret tried to hold an emergency Zoom meeting. 2 board members showed up. One stayed muted. The other asked if the HOA could get a bailout. Margaret just stared. She put out a letter calling the news segment misleading, accusing me of malicious interference. But by then, it didn't matter. Public opinion had turned. Even the Marcus haters on the forum had gone silent or deleted their posts. Then the city sent a team to re-evaluate the land. Their report classified the zone as unstable for development for at least 15 years. They ordered full restoration and slope stabilization funded by what remained of HOA reserves. Margaret's dream project was now a federally flagged environmental hazard. Best part? The bluff was classified as a protected ecological transition zone, which meant no construction, no rebuilding, nothing but native grasses and little wooden signs warning people to stay off the loose rock. I stood at my fence line the next day, coffee in hand, watching crews pull out the last broken rebar. One worker looked up and waved. I raised my mug in salute, but then things got worse. For me. The counter lawsuit hit like a freight train I didn't see coming. Margaret and Tyler, backed by their Denver law firm Hartwell & Associates, specialists in high-stakes litigation, filed a $4.5 million claim against me personally. The paperwork arrived via process server on a Thursday morning. Thick manila envelope. Professional-looking guy in a polo shirt who apologized before handing it to me. Inside, 47 pages of legal allegations that made my blood run cold. They were suing me for malicious interference with community development, defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The claims were absurd but professionally crafted. My relentless campaign of misinformation had sabotaged the project. My false and inflammatory statements had caused irreparable reputational damage. My harassment of HOA leadership had created a hostile environment that prevented proper project completion. They cited every email I'd sent, every certified letter, every warning I'd issued, every news interview I'd given. Everything I'd done to try to stop this disaster they were now claiming as evidence of malicious intent. My attorney, Robert Lansing, read through it with a deepening frown. This is aggressive, very aggressive. Can they win? He set down the papers and looked at me over his reading glasses. Probably not. Your evidence is solid. You were warning them about a real hazard. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. But they don't have to win to destroy you financially. This kind of litigation is expensive. Discovery alone could cost $20,000. Depositions, expert witnesses, court fees, you're looking at $80,000 to $100,000 to defend this properly. Maybe more if it goes to trial. I felt my stomach drop. How much do I have in savings? He knew the answer already. We'd discussed my finances when he took the case. About $47,000. So I'm looking at bankruptcy either way. Unless they're willing to settle for nuisance value? Yes, that's probably their strategy. Bleed you dry, force you to settle just to make it stop. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, running numbers I didn't want to run. Current savings, $47,000. Attorney retainer, $15,000. Already paid. Estimated legal costs to defend lawsuit, $80,000, $100,000. My mortgage, $2,200 month. Property taxes, $8,000 year. Basic living expenses, $1,800 month. I had maybe 4 months before I'd have to start making impossible choices. Sell the truck, cash out my retirement early and take the penalties. Maybe even sell the house if I could find a buyer willing to purchase property with an active lawsuit attached. Worse, the lawsuit was killing my consulting work. I'd built a modest but steady business doing geological surveys for developers, environmental impact assessments, slope stability analysis for mountain construction projects. But word travels fast in small professional communities. Within 2 weeks of the lawsuit being filed, 3 clients canceled contracts. One was apologetic. "Marcus, we believe you, but our legal department says working with you right now is too much liability." Another was blunt. "You're that guy who fights developers. We can't be associated with that." The third just ghosted me completely. By the end of the first month, my income had dropped to zero. By the end of the second month, I was down to $31,000 in savings after paying legal bills and mortgage. Discovery started. They requested everything. Every email I'd ever sent about the project, every photo, every note, every text message, every social media post. My attorney had to review it all, organize it, produce it. $5,000 in billable hours just to comply with their fishing expedition. Then came the depositions. They deposed me for 7 hours over 2 days. Margaret's attorney, a slick guy named Dennison who wore suits that cost more than my truck, asked the same questions 20 different ways, trying to get me to contradict myself or admit to some hidden vendetta. "Mr. Harrison, isn't it true you were angry about the HOA refusing to allow you to join?" "No, I never wanted to join." "But you sent them numerous critical emails." "I sent them warnings about unstable geology, warnings they chose not to heed." "Correct. And that made you angry. It made me concerned. Concerned enough to sabotage their project?" "I didn't sabotage anything. Gravity did that. Moved to strike as non-responsive. On and on for hours. My attorney's bill at the end, $8,000. Then they deposed my engineering witnesses, another $6,000. Then they filed motions to compel additional documentation, another $3,000 in legal fees to respond. 3 months in, I was down to $8,200 in my checking account. My savings were gone. My retirement account was half liquidated with massive tax penalties. I sat at my kitchen table one night, staring at a stack of legal bills and overdue notices, and realized something terrible. I might actually lose. Not because I was wrong, not because I didn't have the evidence, but because I was going broke while they had HOA reserves frozen, but still theoretically there, and Tyler had family money to burn. They could drag this out for years. Bleed me slowly until I had no choice but to settle or declare bankruptcy. My attorney called one evening. His voice was careful, measured. "Marcus, we need to talk about settlement. I didn't do anything wrong. I know. But if this goes to trial, you're looking at another $80,000 minimum in legal fees. Even if you win, and you probably would win, you'll be completely broke. Bankrupt. You could lose the house. They're trying to take everything because I told the truth. Yes. Welcome to civil litigation in America. What are they offering? They want you to sign a statement saying your warnings were overstated and that you regret any harm caused to the HOA's reputation, plus a mutual non-disparagement agreement. In exchange, they drop the lawsuit. That's a lie. My warnings weren't overstated. $15 million of damage proves that. I know, but you'd keep your house, keep what's left of your savings, be able to work again." I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. "Marcus, how long do I have to think about it?" They want an answer by Friday. 3 days. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked out onto my deck, the deck I'd built with my own hands 4 years ago, every board cut and placed with precision and care, and looked at the view I'd fought so hard to protect. The valley stretched out below. dark and quiet except for scattered porch lights dotting the hillsides. In the distance, the lights of Denver glowed against the horizon. I'd bought this land because I believed in something simple, that a person should be able to build a home on solid ground and not have to fight liars and idiots to keep it. I'd warned them, documented everything, done everything right, and now I was being punished for it. Maybe I should have just kept quiet, sold them the land, taken the money, and moved somewhere without HOAs or developers or people who thought concrete could beat geology. The thought made me physically sick. But the alternative, losing everything I'd worked 20 years to build, made me sicker. I stood there until 3 a.m., hands gripping the deck railing, trying to decide which version of defeat I could live with. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Denver area code. At 3 a.m., that usually means bad news or drunk dialers. I answered anyway. Hello? Mr. Harrison? This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a senior paralegal with the Colorado Attorney General's Office, Criminal Division. I apologize for the late hour, but I think we can help each other. I sat down on the deck steps, suddenly wide awake. I'm listening. We've been building a criminal case against Margaret Keene, Tyler Keene, and former Councilman Richard Hayes for the past 2 months. Fraud, falsification of public documents, misuse of HOA funds, conspiracy to circumvent zoning regulations. Okay, we need your testimony. All of it. Your warnings, your documentation, your expertise as a geologist. You're the single most important witness we have. And in exchange? In exchange, we file a motion to dismiss the civil lawsuit against you as retaliatory litigation designed to silence a witness in a criminal investigation. We've already spoken with the judge. He's receptive. The lawsuit just goes away? If you cooperate fully, yes. We'll also push for restitution in the criminal case to cover your legal fees. Can't promise anything, but it's likely. When do you need me? Monday, 9 a.m. Bring everything. I didn't hesitate. I'll be there. Mr. Harrison? One more thing. What you did, warning them. Documenting everything. Standing your ground, that's why we can make this case. You did the right thing. Even when it cost you. It almost cost me everything, but it didn't. And now we're going to make sure it was worth it. After she hung up, I sat there on my deck as the sky slowly lightened from black to deep blue to gray. I'd been hours away from surrendering. Hours away from signing a lie just to survive. Instead, I was going to testify. And not just testify, I was going to help send them to jail. Sometimes the system works. Not often, not easily, but sometimes. This was going to be one of those times. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Margaret sat at the defense table in a black blazer, hair stiff with spray, face stretched between defiance and exhaustion. She didn't look at me when I walked past. Tyler sat beside her, tie too tight, hands twitching over a legal pad. Richard Hayes entered last. No longer confident councilman. Just a man in a suit trying not to drown. The case was straightforward. Fraud, document falsification, reckless endangerment, misuse of HOA funds, conspiracy to subvert zoning protocols. My part was simple. Testify to the facts. I walked the jury through the timeline, the warnings, the data, the receipts. Their attorney tried to imply I had a vendetta. I said, my vendetta is against bad engineering. Everything else is just gravity doing its job. The judge chuckled. The evidence didn't just speak, it shouted. Fake signatures. Illegal permits. Misuse of community funds Margaret had rerouted to Tyler's company without member votes. That live broadcast where Margaret threw Hayes under the bus played twice. The jury watched her face crack in high definition. Verdicts came within a week. 18 months. 5 mandatory in county jail. Barred from holding any organizational office for 10 years. 2 years probation. Heavy fine. Forced resignation with permanent ethics violation. Lost his contractor's license. Now sells water filters at a hardware store. The HOA's remaining assets, $3.1 million, were split. Part for restitution to damaged homeowners, part for state-mandated land restoration. I received $185,000 for legal fees, stress, and reputational damage. A month later, the wreckage was gone. In its place, quiet grass, survey flags, and a small wooden sign at the edge of my property. It read, "I warned you. I didn't put it there, but I left it up." I stood on my deck that evening with bourbon in hand, watching sunset paint the valley gold and crimson. The view was mine again, unobstructed, unchanged. Behind me, my house stood solid on stable ground. Below, native grasses swayed where concrete had briefly tried to conquer geology. I'd fought for my land, for science, for truth, and I'd won. Not because I was powerful, but because the earth doesn't care about bylaws, board votes, or suburban politics. It only cares about physics, and physics always wins.